have a couple slides today, and split the presentation into three different parts. The first part is like a little bit about me and my journey to be a PM, and some advice. Juliet was saying that this group is either new to tech, trying to break into tech. So I focused a lot of things on like general advice that can apply not only to like engineers or product managers or designers, so that hopefully everyone gets something out of this and can bring it to them with any future job. I will probably talk a bit too fast, so please let me know if that's happening and if I need to slow down. And we also have a section in the presentation to do a bit of a workshop, but if we run out of time, we'll just do a temperature check with the group and maybe we'll turn it into a Q&A. So keep that in mind for later. So I'm Amy Killoran. I work with Juliet. It's really awesome. We work together at Green Shield, which is an insurance company, but we get to work in the wonderful section of the technology side, which is basically like an incubator to quickly develop new tools and technology that they're not able to do in the traditional sense. So that's why our group got brought in. And it's really fun and brings together all of our values and is going to help Canadians get better healthcare in the end. So it's a really wonderful mission. And thank you, Juliet, for inviting me today. So my journey into tech is not straightforward, and I really don't think anyone's is, especially in our age group, because some of us didn't even grow up with computers or the internet. So I was actually a fashion student and also worked in graphic design, did some art, a lot of marketing, and then eventually did project management and marketing management, and quit my job because I did not like what I was doing. I knew something better was out there, and it was. And that was when I became a product manager. I got my first job from an old boss who reached out and was looking for someone to help break into a new market. And they thought of me, and that was really amazing, a really good compliment, but also allowed me to get some education in product management as part of the negotiation of that role, which I highly recommend doing if there's a job offer on the table. Don't just think about what am I getting paid or my vacation. Think about what education can I build into this? What other side perks can you get that into that offer? So in product management, I specialize mostly in working in industries that are sort of legacy and paper-based, and then digitizing them and automating systems so that humans can do more fun human things and the machines can do more of the boring stuff and also increase accuracy. So I worked in travel, cannabis, multifamily resident software, and now I'm working in insurance, particularly with digital pharmacy and helping folks manage their medications, which is super fun. And as I talk about that, I just wanted to mention that everyone's journey is going to be different. And this is a really funny visual that I like to show folks. It's like when you're in the middle of it, your career doesn't seem to make any sense, or your past jobs don't seem to apply to future jobs. But the older you get and the more experience you gain, you realize everything was sort of setting you up for what's coming next. And so I'd just like you to think about that. If you're interviewing for a role or you're applying for a job and you don't think, oh, I don't have the right experience or I've never done this before, it doesn't matter that you've never done that exact thing before, because you'll always have something to apply. For example, this is kind of silly, but like this is some of my life experience that has nothing to do with working in software or being a product manager, but it really, really does. Like everything can cross over. So if you were ever a cashier or working front of house, customer service, you know that you get a lot more empathetic for folks. You get a lot more self-knowledge about what you like to do, what you don't like to do. I was working at the government for a little bit, and I learned a lot about processes and also gained a lot of patience, because that does not work as quickly as the kind of environment that we're in now. And so something to think about is when you're interviewing, don't just think about like, I did this job, I did this thing in tech. You can also bring personal experience into it, personal projects, like everything you're doing here at Cherry on Tech. And don't be afraid of bringing those kind of stories to your roles, because that's what you'll have to rely on if you don't have experience in tech when you're interviewing. And an example for how to do that is this STAR method. And I know I'm getting a little bit off topic of MVP, but I really think that this will help you when you're going through your interviews. If someone is interviewing you and says, tell me about a time when you solved a problem that helped people, you don't have to bring that back to like a user or something you built technically. It could be about something that happened in your family, something that happened personally, a crisis that you solved. But what you should keep in mind is this STAR acronym, and that stands for situation, task, actions, and results. It just helps you keep things succinct and tell that story. So you might say, oh, I had a leak in my basement, and what was happening is that there's water everywhere, and I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I had to stop the water, had to get the water out of my house. I had to contact the insurance company, document everything. And even though it's not work related, it shows like you can think on your feet, you can do something in a time of crisis, and then you can talk about the results. Anyway, sorry, it's a little bit silly, but yeah, it's something that I think will be really helpful when you're trying to frame, like, how can I take this experience that I have and apply it to this job interview? And in that note of all of us having different experiences and trying to build your career from what may seem like a patchwork of unrelated things, I just think we should take a moment for ourselves and celebrate where we are. Joining this group is really amazing. Having these colleagues, some of which you'll probably work together again in the future, so you're already building connections. So just give yourself a pat on the back of where you were and where you will be and where you are now. So it's really key to do. Okay, Juliet originally asked me to talk also about like working with others, and so I've just got a bunch of tips here and areas that I think are very important and apply everywhere and not necessarily tech related, but I think that if you can master some of these things, you will have an amazing career and everyone will be singing your praises. So the first thing is being kind to yourself. We all know that on an airplane, you have to put your own mask on first if there's an emergency happening. Same thing in tech. It can be very stressful. It can be very busy, but you need to understand like that work-life balance and do everything you can in your power to be kind to yourself. Because if you're not kind to yourself, how are you going to be kind to others and build good things? So keeping your tools simple, Notion, Figma, you can probably do 99% of your jobs in those two tools. It's really amazing. I would say you also need to write things down. So don't try to rely on memorizing things. Documentation is there for a reason. And if you're thinking about something or asking a question, someone else has that same question. So you also need to make sure that it's clear to your team. And don't do the same thing twice. As much as possible, if you are repeating yourself, you're wasting time, you're wasting energy. So as much as possible, you should automate things, use templates, video recordings, and try to even like reusing your user stories or journey maps, all of that. It'll be relevant all across the business and all across the group you're working with. Since you're working on doing MVP, even finding a template for doing your PRDs, finding a template for your user stories is a really good way to save time and also remove a lot of that like mental energy from trying to reinvent the wheel every single time when you need to put your energy into the problem you're looking at and the solutions you're building. Anyway, so now that you've been kind to yourself, you need to be kind to your team. I know a lot of people don't think like this in business, but I believe it to be very, very key. Juliet has done an amazing job at making the beginning of this meeting really fun and everyone sharing a bit about themselves. And when you join the workforce in tech, it might not always be like that, but you can bring your personality to the group and try to make sure that that culture continues if you like it. So a good way to learn about each other is learning each other's learning styles and communication styles. So an example at another company that I worked at was we all did personality tests. And we realized, oh, this person is a visual learner. This person really needs things written down. This person needs an agenda that is there a week before so that they don't feel anxious. So any way that you can learn more about your team is really great. I also learned through those tests that my entire team's personality spanned the gamut. One person liked to be praised aloud and in front of a huge group, and another person would completely cringe and hate it. He would take that praise and not even register it because he'd be so embarrassed. So that person wanted everything to happen more privately and that praise to be more one-on-one. So while you are learning about your product and learning about yourself, also make sure to learn about your teammates, because it's very valuable, not only in how you communicate with them with work, but also how you give feedback, how you work through problems. Yeah. And being clear is very, very important. Don't assume that people understand what you are communicating to them. This is another good reason why it's good to communicate in multiple formats: visually, written, videos, flowcharts, data schemas. All of that is very valuable. Something that will also be key is learning how to say no nicely. You can say no not nicely, that also works, but it's better if it comes with a smile. And I'm going to skip praise because I talked about that a little bit, but use a parking lot. And we'll even maybe use this today in our workshop. Has anyone here heard about a parking lot before in terms of tech or team collaboration? I see a couple nods, a couple thumbs up. Yeah. So it's basically just the ability to take a topic or a question or conversation, put it to the side, keep a note for it for later, but make sure that you're keeping your original conversation on track and using your time effectively. It's as simple as just a document or a sticky note on the side of your Figma board. So it's really, really awesome. Very, very valuable and useful, especially in client calls or when working with a difficult stakeholder. And also be human. I think this group, is probably very interested in accessibility and equality, and we need more of that in technology. And part of that is also just remembering that we're people. We're not just outputs. We're not just story points. We are not just like resources that need to be managed. We're people. We have personalities. We've got families, and we also have quirks, which is really fun. So speak simply when possible. Try to balance asynchronous work with real-time collaboration. I know that a lot can be done asynchronously, but you also can't replace the care and passion that you have with another group of folks when you interact with them in real time. So while you don't need to have 100% of real-time collaboration, it's really nice just to know people's personalities and see their faces if that's all right with them. Always explain acronyms. I think that one's key. And apologize. It's really interesting. I never see anyone talk about this, but mistakes will happen. We are human and we will make mistakes. And if you can admit to them, identify what happened and move on, people will respect you more. You will lose less time on trying to point the finger at someone, and your work will be faster because you won't be stressing and dwelling on what went wrong. It'll be out in the open. And I know that's really bizarre, but definitely apologize when something goes wrong and talk about it openly. And lastly, be curious and ask questions. I actually got this put on my headphones. I don't know if you can see that. It says give love and be curious. As product people, as tech people, you're always asking questions. How can we make this better? What's going wrong? Why do I feel frustrated right now? And it's good to ask yourself, but always remember to ask those you're working with as well. Lots of questions and your stakeholders. So in technology, in the tech world, or really any group that's working together trying to get something done, what we've got is a million problems and a million ways to solve it, and all the energy in the world. But really, in your team of, let's say, 7, you don't have all the energy in the world, and you're not able to build every single solution, and you aren't able to tackle every single problem all at once. So that's why this tiny, tiny slice is what actually gets done, and why making an MVP is so important and prioritizing with your team. even documenting what the MVP is very important, because someone might think, oh, you're solving a problem that's way over here, when actually that's not possible within your time or your budget. And I know we talk about like figuring out what the problem is and solutioning for it, but the reason I have this third circle here for energy is because you only have a finite amount of energy. You only have so many hours in the day, you only have so many resources, you might only have one developer or none to get something done, or no designer. You might have to wear those hats yourself, and depending on like what kind of startup or like company you're working at, you might have to wear a lot of different hats and do many different roles. So you always have to keep yourself focused. So on that note, how do you stay focused? How do you get that tiny little slice of work done? Prioritization. I'm sure everyone here has heard of some form of prioritization from this list. This is just a couple. And what's really interesting is that as folks who are learning about technology and the different stages of putting out a product or working together, or how do tech teams get things done with sprints or their retros, there's a lot of theory, and there's a lot of what should happen according to the book or according to the process or the methodology that you're working with. But in reality, those things are very different when you're working on a real project, when you're working on a real team, because you only have a small amount of energy and a small amount of resources to get that done. And there's no right answers for prioritization. There definitely can be a wrong answer, but there's no right answers for sure. I'm wondering, is there any method here that folks haven't heard of or that you're not familiar with?
Can you talk about RICE?
Yeah, so this one actually I think is one of the most popular ones. RICE stands for Reach, Impact, Confidence, and Effort. And that's something that will apply to an entire project, as well as like an individual ticket or a tiny task that you can do. So the RICE measurement scoring sort of grid, let's say that you could make a spreadsheet, and I've done this at a couple jobs, where you list out everything that anyone has asked that is totally possible that you'd like to work on, and you end up with like 2,000 items that your team could possibly do. That's very overwhelming. And what all these methodologies do, but particularly RICE, is allow you to take those 4 categories of reach, impact, confidence, and effort, give them a score, and then use that score to help you narrow down the list into what is most important. And I'm saying most important in quotes, because the most important thing, maybe something ends up with a score of 2,000. Oh my gosh, we really have to fix that. Might not be possible, might be relying on something else that the company needs to do, might be waiting on some funding to arrive, or maybe it's relying on a specialty developer that hasn't been hired yet. So everything is, you have to take with a grain of salt, but it's that's why I say, like, it's overwhelming. In theory, it's amazing, but in practice, how you're prioritizing might look different, or it might be a mix of these items. And there will be times when some of these prioritization methods are more appropriate than others. I think I saw a question in the chat with Moscow. It looks like a different name for how might we? Oh, interesting. I haven't heard of how might we, but Moscow stands for what we're building must do X, should do X, could do X, and won't do X. And it's a really interesting way to map out what you're trying to build. I think we have a question. No? Okay.
I asked in the message.
Okay.
Yeah. But I can say, so yeah, like when you say each method applies like differently to each situation, so I wanted to know how you might like find the best one, and what things to consider when you're making that decision?
Yeah, it's all of these prioritization methods. These aren't even all of them. There's tons more. But I'd recommend going and finding like a visual for each one and reading just a little bit about it, because depending on your situation, it might apply differently. But for this group, for what you're trying to do with defining your MVP, I think that the Moscow method and story mapping would be most effective, and then maybe using by a feature to determine if you are having a disagreement about like which thing is most important and they seem to be equally weighted, letting the team decide like more emotionally what they would like to work on. So buying a feature is really like voting on it, giving all of your stakeholders or everyone who's in the room ability to basically like put a coin or a stamp on the thing that they'd like built. And that way someone could put all of their votes on one and someone else might sprinkle them throughout. And then in the end, you get a little bit of a democratized idea. I definitely think that buy a feature needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because the majority of people might want to build something or vote on it. Again, it might not be possible, or there might be a technical reason why you need to do something else first and then another thing. So for determining which method is good for each situation, I would say if you can keep it simple, keep it simple. And try not to overwhelm yourself with that like 2,000 list of tasks and a lot of work to like enter in values and that kind of thing. You're smart people, you can use your judgment for the most part to put things into broad buckets. Yeah, did that answer the question?
Yeah, I will look into the definition of each, and I wanted to know more about the kind of what criteria that people should consider deciding each method, but I think it takes too much time. So
yeah, there's definitely multiple like master classes and articles that could be read for each of these. But maybe in the workshop, we can go through some examples of particularly Moscow later. So with all of that said, I know there's a lot of questions, there's so many options. I'd say don't let the amount of choice overwhelm you, and don't let the tool become the reason things aren't getting done. Because a lot of folks, you might start and say, oh, how are we going to get all of this work done? Or this is too many tasks, or I don't even understand how this tool works. It's better to be simple at first and then make it more complicated later, or when there's more people on the team. But yeah, it's better to get something done than to just be worrying about which point should I assign this thing, or like, I'm not sure about the priority of this item, so I'm just going to like ruminate on that for a long time. It's less helpful. And so two tactics for trying to overcome that analysis paralysis, besides the actual prioritization tools themselves, is what is the next best action? What is the next thing that we can do that will make the most impact and we can do immediately with the least amount of effort? And I use a lot of words that are in those prioritization methods, but it really does help. And a tip that we've done on a lot of my teams is a task crawl. So if you're feeling particularly overwhelmed and you can't focus on like that one next thing, take a look at everything on your to-do list and try to just move everything forward just one tiny little bit. And that's not for the tickets themselves, but more for like your personal to-dos. Yeah. So now we're in the workshop section where we can maybe do a little bit of looking into how this works in real life. Or do we want to stop for some questions? Sorry about that. I'm rushing through.
Yeah, I don't see any questions coming in, so I feel like everybody's excited to see action. Yes.
Okay. So for this workshop, we'll just go over MVP again. Minimum viable product. I put all of the words in brackets because it really does help when you're feeling overwhelmed or trying to think about it, to think about each word individually. Minimum, like what is the least thing that we could do to possibly get this done? I had an interview with a large company, and even though it was a tech company, the right answer that came out of that interview for the question that they gave me was a piece of paper. Like that was actually the minimum viable product to get to the next step. So don't always think that something has to be like very fancy in order to be a product that you can talk about on your resume or something that needs to be built into the world. For viable, again, we talk about like resources, how much time, does the technology even exist for what you need? Are there laws prohibiting what you're trying to build, or laws that need to come into place in order for you to envision the product that you'd like? And then product, like I said, the format that something takes. It could be an app, it could be a website, but it also could be more simple. It could be a form, could be a piece of paper, could be a Google survey that you send out. And so I know when we talk about product, everyone imagines sort of like a thing that you can sell that's packaged up really beautifully, but honestly, a lot of the time it's incremental steps towards something else. And this build, measure, learn cycle will become very, very familiar with all of you, or you'll become familiar with it. And honestly, this is key. I put measure first because a lot of people think you build something first and then learn, or then measure, but really to even begin your project, you do research, you figure out what does the world need, or what do I think the world is, what's missing in the world. And just that research as a starting point, you're already measuring things, you're already finding out what's missing. Sorry, I'm losing my words a little bit, but you'll become very familiar with that. And a very, very common example of MVP to help you visualize it is the skateboard bike to car example. If you're trying to build a transportation method to get from point A to point B, and you're building it not in a agile way, you might imagine building a car and then for sprint 1, you would have maybe the windows, but you can't get from point A to point B with just windows. And then for sprint B, you might have the tailpipe. You can't get from point A to point B with just the tailpipe and windows. And so that's why we're talking about like the smallest thing you can do first and then expanding on it, rather than trying to build the perfect thing immediately. So skateboard gets you from point A to point B, but it's not very safe. It's not very easy. You also should get a helmet, which is like additional cost. And not everyone can even ride a skateboard, so it's not very accessible either. The bike, still not sheltered from the elements, but it's a little bit more comfortable. You can ride for longer distances. So you're adding like these extra features to make it a nicer experience for the user, but it's still not where you want to go in the end, which is that car. So when people are saying, what is your minimum viable product that you need to build? You really have to be a little bit ruthless with yourself to strip those things down. And honestly, it's very difficult to do. And I think everyone working in tech has got caught into this with making their MVP too big. One example of MVP in an interview, I just thought it would be interesting for these folks when you are actually going to tech companies and talking with them, is building one of the things they requested me to do was to build an MVP for a docking station for a rocket ship. It's not a very possible thing, but it's very creative and very interesting. So try to make sure that you're, not letting yourself get too wrapped up in what's possible when you're doing interviews, because you might get hit with some very interesting and fantastical questions. And when planning your MVP, we talked about this a little bit, research is key. Keep a list of ideas for later, but you don't necessarily have to put everything in your backlog. Keep your team up to date with changes, protect from scope creep, and make sure to keep your values in mind. That's That's more of a personal one, but if you want to build something you want to see in the world, make sure that you're building it right from day one. So for the live workshop, I think we only have a few minutes left, is let's pretend and take just like 5 minutes to map out, using the Moscow method, this scenario. Let's say that the government of Canada has hired your company to build a digital tool to help national park visitors report issues like littering and hazards. In this example, ignore financial questions and internet connectivity. And what I'd love is if anyone wants to shout out or write in the chat, and we're going to fill in some of these categories here. So, sorry, no, it's a little bit small. Sorry about that. So the government of Canada has hired your company to build a digital tool. I'm just going to paste this into the chat so everyone can see it. Here we go. And using the Moscow method, you would literally list out some of your assumptions, what this must have, what it should have, what it won't have, and what it could have. Actually, Juliet, do we have time for this?
Yes, I feel like we can try. I know that some people will have like the squad meetings right after this, so I feel like if all of us contribute, we can finish really quickly. Assumptions. We can say it aloud too. I feel like
that'd be great.
I feel like for me, the assumption is not everybody will have a phone. Maybe not everybody will have yes. Okay, Larry's saying we must have a way to users to send message and connect. So the must have is users to send message and connect.
Mm-hmm.
Misaki is saying for the assumption, users know what to report and when to.
A great one.
Samsung is saying for okay. Samsung for they could have a park map with pin drops abilities. Yes.
Oh, I love that Samson, that you already categorized that into a could have, because that would be lovely, but also be very fancy to build. Yeah. Park map, pin drop ability.
30 is a must-have a system to define location time of notice.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to write time of submission, time of notice. Is there anything you think it would not have if it is a government digital product about national parks for users to report things? Anything it wouldn't have?
I can tell you, another assumption is from Alex. There is a location to receive reports. Misaki education is Misaki, is this in which category for the
wouldn't have.
Wouldn't have. Okay. Wouldn't have a fee. Okay, yes, makes sense. So this will be free for everybody. For Adrian, should have a system to limit redundancy. Basuda won't have a contact details or personal information. Curdy could have rewards. Okay, so it's like more that I share the things, I will get prizes. And from Lara, won't have complex language, so it will be easy to understand.
Nice. These are really amazing. I didn't even think of so many of these. It's really wonderful to have a lot of heads coming together on it. Complex language. Could have ability to send images of hazards and littering. Let's see. Send images. Yeah, so a lot of these are very, very similar in one category. I'd like to talk about is the location thing, and then we can talk about how to define that further. But the park map and pin drop as a fancier version of defining the location. Like defining the location is absolutely that must have, but what the location looks like, the very, very simplest way for someone to report that would be typing in a field manually that is not connected to a map, that is not smart at all, that doesn't pre-fill, that does not even know what country they're in. Like that would be like the very, very minimum viable product. However, it wouldn't be a very good user experience, right? It would be, they might get it wrong, they might spell something wrong, they might have a typo in it, they might send a message that has nothing to do with location. So that is the kind of thing that you think about. It's like, how do we reduce this down to the simplest way, but also balance that with having a good user experience, reliable data coming in for the parks team to understand. And then even those items about like someone reporting, if you have a field that is really unhelpful, the amount of feedback that you get back from that helps change your prioritization for the future. There was a lot I tried to pack into this presentation, and I really love talking about this stuff, and I obviously also should have MVP'd this presentation. I added so much to it, but I hope that these examples helped. And when you're trying to think of your MVP, you can picture that skateboard to car, and when you're trying to get the tech jobs, that you guys are helping each other, reaching out to your community, and keeping that STAR method in your head for describing your experience. Thank you so much for letting me be here today. And Juliet, let me know if there's any questions that come out of this. I'm happy to answer things even offline. Yeah, thank you.
People keep dropping ideas about this. This is what's so good. I know. We just want to, every guest speaker wants to share so much, and we appreciate always to have you all over here. So thank you so much, Amy.